Hey guys, Anthony here. I'm going to do a continuation video tonight on a video I posted the other night entitled Urban SHTF Apartment Building Defenses. And I went out walking that night and I kind of brought up the topic and I cut the video short when I asked a certain question. So tonight I wanted to continue that video and that discussion. But before I do, I want to read you a quote from Sun Tzu regarding our neighbors. And it says this: "We cannot enter into alliances until we are acquainted with the designs of our neighbors." Sun Tzu. That quote says a lot. It says a whole lot. In an SHTF situation, it's not the time to get to know your neighbors, and a lot of people talk about that on YouTube. That the time to build friendships, alliances with people, start a group, or to get acquainted is before an SHTF happens. Because after it happens, anything goes. There could be people pretending, there could be people acting. You don't know, and you can't take any chances. So therefore, unless it's an extreme circumstance, I don't foresee making too many alliances during an SHTF. Maybe afterwards, when things settle down and the smoke starts clearing, it's a possibility. But take that quote and highlight it or carry it around and do what you have to do with it. It's very important. In the video, I talked about being in an apartment complex, because that is my situation now. And I came up with an estimate of, in an SHTF, and let's say there was 300 people in my complex, and out of those 300, 30 were going to be an issue during an SHTF or after an SHTF. So out of those 30, I said, how many will be organized and armed? And I came up with the number 10. Now I'm just coming up with these numbers. It could be higher, it could be lower, I don't know. I'm going to read you a short story of a gentleman, a subscriber, that typed in a scenario that he went through for 3 weeks during a major storm, and maybe we can get some insight in that story. I'll read that in just a minute. So if you're in your apartment complex and you have to deal now with 10 armed individuals, the best thing to do, and what I plan to do, is be able to stay indoors, be able to stay put, be able to hunker down without having to go out. That's not easy. It's not something that many people will probably do. They will be out and about, milling about, putting themselves out there, and possibly becoming victims of these, not only these 30 people that may be an issue, but other people that may come into the scene that are not part of this apartment complex. So that 30 can multiply depending on the area and what's going on. So staying inside is probably one of the best forms of advice I could give, and something I plan on doing. But in order to do that, you need to have certain things in place. Well, your shelter is your number one. Is your house, your apartment. Is it fortified? Is it defendable? We'll get into that in subsequent videos. Do you have supplies? Most importantly, behind me you see the water machine. During hurricane season, I try to keep at least 6 full 5-gallon water jugs. I just got my delivery today, so I'm up to 6 plus 1 on the machine right now. So that's 7 times 5 is 35 gallons of fresh water that can be used for drinking, cooking, and maybe some light washing or cleaning wounds. Water for flushing the toilets or anything like that, if they went down, would have to come from outdoors. Or we'd have to figure out another way to dispose of that waste. I wanted to touch on the movie, or the National Geographic movie that was on a few months ago called American Blackout. And I'll put the link to the video review I did of it in this video. It was basically a 2-hour special. It was a portrayal of a blackout that occurred, a scenario that occurred over a 10-day period. It was, like a grid down type situation. And it covered five major topics, or 5 different types of people, from a prepper to college students to a pregnant lady and her family, to a young vlogger, and a boyfriend and girlfriend. The boyfriend and girlfriend lived in, I think it was New York City. They lived in a high-rise. They lived on the 46th floor, and they had nothing. They had no supplies. They didn't even have a way to open up a can. If I remember correctly, the boyfriend cut his hand really bad trying to open up a can with a knife. And so they ventured out. This boyfriend offered to pay, $100 or $500 for some water. That's how bad things were. On their way back to the building to now walk up 46 flights, they were confronted by a guy walking by. Whether he lived in the building or was just walking by, it doesn't really show it, but he confronts him in the lobby, and the boyfriend has a can of peaches, and they basically, get into a fight almost to the death over a can of peaches that him and his girlfriend were taken back up to the 46th floor. So the point I'm trying to bring out in that scenario is, if they would have had supplies, water, food, they already had the shelter. They're on the 46th floor, maybe some weapons to defend that apartment. They would have been able to stay put the 10-day period, and things would have been great for them, and he would have not almost had to get killed when he ventured out. So that's something to think about. If you have to venture out, you better be able to defend yourself. You better know what you're doing. You better probably make it at night, and you better probably have some night vision. And you better know your surroundings pretty good, because people can lay out for you inside an apartment building. Also, I believe in that show there was a scene of a lady peeking out her apartment. I'm not sure if it was that show or another show. But at any rate, it's the same type of scenario. She peeks out of her apartment, and now there are these guys in the stairwell, and they abduct her and take her away, not knowing what they're going to do with her. But you get the point. She ventured out of her apartment to see if the coast was clear, to see something. There were people in the stairwell waiting or going through other apartments, kicking doors in, opportunists probably, and they saw her and they snatched her up and took her. It's a without rule of law. These people know that you can't call the police. The police are not going to come even if you call them. You can't call the fire department. And so they're opportunists, and they thrive on that type of predator. So, getting back to my scenario of the people in the apartment complex, the 30 people. Now, all the rest of the people in the complex, did they all leave? Are they all prepared to stay in place? That I'm not going to try to speculate on that, but I would advise. Be safe to say that most people would not be able to sustain themselves in their apartment for any length of time, longer than maybe 3 or 4 days. That's just my opinion. Are most of them preppers? My answer to that is no. Most of them are not preppers. In fact, most of them probably laugh at people who say they are preppers or prepare for storms. Even down here in South Florida, where people should be preppers because of the ability for us to be hit with a hurricane at any one time during a 6-month period, it should be natural that they are preppers, but yet time and time again, year in and year out, when there's a storm, you see people panicking. There's a rush on the stores, a rush on gas, and when most people should just be able to sit back and relax if they've been doing their prepping right. How many will pose a problem? We already said 30 people. Now 30 people posing a problem in the apartment complex can be a major issue. If If they're going around kicking doors in, breaking windows, what are they doing? Are they outside robbing cars? So 30 people to contend with. If you don't have to go out and you can stay in and hunker down and be quiet and not use too much lighting at night, maybe stay in the dark or with in a room that doesn't give off your position or that you have a light on, the odds are no one's going to probably come to your unit. But if they do, you need to be ready to defend it. And we'll get into that in another video. So we have 10 possibly organized armed individuals in this apartment complex. 10 armed individuals out of the 30 that are up to no good. So that's a very big number. Now out of those 10, we don't know if more people could be added to that number that come from the outside, and things can get worse. So if you're out in that type of environment, believe me, you could get picked off pretty quickly. If you're by yourself and it's just you and your family and you have no group to help you, you're probably going to be a statistic. So this video stresses in this type of situation, in this apartment complex, the key would be to stay inside, not venture out. You know, aside from a fire or something that forces you out of the apartment, stay inside. I'm going to read a scenario, a true scenario that really happened to someone, one of my subs. I won't say his name because he didn't. He doesn't want his name published, but he says here to me, speaking of things that his topic was prepping in the darkness. Be prepared to operate in the dark. In other words, you have to know how to move around and get around in the dark without giving away your position. And because, number one, there may not be any lights for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in this scenario, that's what happened to him. There is a feeling that issues will arise off the grid and mainly at night. He's correct. This is when we are most vulnerable. I must relay an issue me and my family had right after a direct hit of a major storm. He doesn't say which storm. There were no lights, no power, no immediate help, widespread destruction, and thugs everywhere. Okay, so the scenario I'm talking about is real. Thugs were everywhere. My walkie-talkie was my two-way communication to the outside world, and unfortunately my boss called me into work. So his boss called him into work. He had to go into work. There was a certain fear for my family. I did return to work, sneaking out of my home as to not draw attention to myself and to make sure the thugs wouldn't try to enter my home. When I arrived to work, my boss inquired about my family. I told him that they were okay and at home with the guns. A few minutes later, I was returning to my home. My boss understood. So his boss understood his situation and let him return back to his family. But my point is that I understood that there is a time when good people must act as strong as the bad to survive. Good people must act as strong as the bad to survive. Very important line there. No sane person wants to kill or injure their brother, but during a crisis there are some temporarily insane people who act and react out of fear. And that could be opportunists, it could be people that were not prepping, and now all of a sudden they need supplies and food and water, and what do? They need to do what they got to do, so they could become a problem and operate out of fear. There is no rationality for the moment. We must therefore act accordingly to defend ourselves. And part of our defense during the scary times was making sure we were prepared, especially at night. Our scary time lasted for 3 weeks. That's no light after 9 p.m., no power to cook, no conveniences of any kind, i.e. no electric can openers, cable, no nothing except ourselves and our own ingenuity. Anthony, we survived the crisis. We had to. It was our life. It was life or death, or our choice. Our pantry was stocked. We had ample canned food, drinking water, cooking fuels, guns, and ammo. batteries, solar devices as small as the lights on the lawn, leaving their solar devices on the lawn they used for light. Our windows and doorways were shuttered. We were more ready than most, but what we couldn't control was fresh air and the high humid temperatures, okay? Because they were shuttered in, the fresh air was a problem getting into their place. We did have plumbing, we had our facilities, health, our Creator's hand, and we constantly strive to meet each and every challenge. A can-do attitude abounded, but our biggest challenge had to be with darkness. The biggest challenge was with darkness, he says. Generators are good, but there was that feeling that we must try to endure in the dark without it. The generators could mask our other problems. Noise, for one, they can attract attention because they're noisy. Possible gas explosions from natural gas lines leaking, breathing fumes, etc. We became accustomed to our surroundings without the need for our eyes, so they became accustomed to operating in the dark. Our other senses took over and we could hear things. Some were bad, like gunshots and firefights, and then there was some weeping as well. But there were some good sounds too, some hopeful sounds that you hear when you believe. Okay, Anthony, it's important that I relay this to you. I believe it will help you in many ways. Take care and call me anytime. I thank him for sharing that story because those few paragraphs that I read, it was a lot of meat, a lot of good information of the one line here, being prepared with their stock with ample canned food, water, batteries, cooking fuels, guns, ammo. Did you hear it? Those are all items that an average prepper must put together for a prolonged, sustainable period. So today's video, part 2 of Urban SHTF apartment building defenses. I'll end it on that note. We'll pick up some comments and we'll go off on our part 3 and talk about possibly having to leave our apartment and what the ramifications could be if that happened. And then we'll get into mutual assistance groups and setting up those beforehand and coming to each other's aid in a long-term SHTF situation. Thanks for joining me, guys. Take care. Stay ready. Send in your questions and comments. Anthony signing off.